This man installed a trapdoor in his living room that led to an underground space. Home improvement and DIY projects are tough, but can turn out to be some of the most rewarding projects out there. There are some that take a couple of hours and make a room look way better, while there are projects that take much longer and change the entire layout of a space. There was a man who decided to take his home improvement to a whole new level. Known as Jazz, this man decided to optimize his home's basement level, which he called the dungeon, from the storage facility to something a whole lot better. The project would mean creating a new entrance to it, as it was only accessible from the outside, and completely overhauling the inside. After clearing out the space, Jazz decided to make it into a dream room that he'd always wanted in his home, starting with some carpentry and woodworking. The plan was to create a secret entrance to the room from inside the house as well. Brilliant work that's amazing to watch. Jazz wanted there to be a way to get into the room without going outside, while also making sure the interior door wasn't so obvious. As one does, he built a trapdoor in the living room so that he'd be able to enter the room from inside the house, while the outside world didn't suspect for a moment that there was a door there to begin with. Wait until you see what it all looks like now. Jazz was beyond excited about his project and wanted to inspire others to do the same. He documented his progress online so that people could understand what he was doing. The project started in April 2016 and gave details of what the room was until he transformed it into the masterpiece that it now is. He called it the dungeon as it was the room under the house. He and his wife used it as a storage room, but it was getting a little too much. The ceiling was low, but it was perfect for what he wanted to do with it. Jazz told those following him that the plan was to make the dungeon into a home theater. The space was perfect in size and shape, and he really wanted the home to have this room for the family. When he first showed the progress, there was a lot to do, and he admitted he should have waited to reveal it to the world. From that moment of initial reveal, he kept adding progress photos. The first thing he knew he had to do in terms of plans was cut an entrance into the room, since the only one there was now from the outside. On the side of their home, Jez and his wife had a door that led to the DIY room. There was a pathway that also led directly to it with a fence next to it. He proceeded to knock the fence down and upend the path so as to change the entire external structure of the landscape too. He replaced the bricks with new ones and added wooden paneling to enforce it all. Jez also added gravel to the side as a decorative additive to the whole thing. This was a huge change, but there was more to come. The fence was also an outdoor project Jez was going to work on. It was moved to a further stance in the yard closer to the door, expanding the yard and making the area of the door more secure. He followed up the outside with a fantastic paint job, painting the door, fence, and outside of the house entirely in white. This paint job changed the entire outside look of the home, making it more modern and contemporary. These were the smaller changes, as the biggest shift was going to be inside the room. The excitement to see it is real. After the outside was done, it was time for Jez to turn his attention to the interior room he called a dungeon. Once the room was empty, you could see the concrete floor and brick step. Jez was sure he needed to remove unnecessary metal shelving from the room to open it up and make it more spacious. He was also going to revamp the heating duct and air flowing into the room, especially if there was going to be people in it. After removing the metal shelving, Jez put in cabinets that he painted in a dark color to match the room. The movie-going experience was important to him, so he wanted the room to be dark, yet inviting. In between the two cabinets, he left a space open for it to become a bar. After the cabinets were being put in, the room began taking shape and looking more like the exciting project it was. Cabinets in, now it was time for some seating. Jez put in bench seating around that old bench made of bricks. He then turned his attention to a structure he created to have a projector placed within. He then moved to add LED lights throughout the room. He then proceeded to add curtains, rubber flooring for soundproofing, and atop that, a layer of AstroTurf to maintain the temperature in the room as it was to remain level. One of the last things for Jez to do was place the screen in the room. He added more curtains to the entrance. Jez took a picture of the entire process and added the photos to Imager, where followers flocked to it. The album has over 300,000 views and garnered over 12,000 points on the platform, earning it a lot of credit on the platform and having it exposed to more and more people. The dungeon was done and Jez was happy about it. It was a fully functioning home theater. However, the biggest issue he still had was that there was only one way to get in and out of the room, and that was through the outside of the home. Jez brainstormed how he was going to fix this issue, as he wanted a creative way to get in and out of the room through the house. Jez saw this as an opportunity to have another project on his hands. He wrote to his followers that they may remember the dungeon and how he transformed it, and that now he's going to get creative about getting in and out of it without facing the elements. He remembered that as a kid he loved secret ways to get into places, and used that as inspiration for the new way to get into the theater. The first hurdle was having Jez's wife agree for him to cut a hole in the floor. He wanted the entrance to be at the top left of the room where the ceiling of the theater meets the floor of the living room. It'd be right next to the screen in the theater and right next to the fireplace in the living room. There was another step to this, but first, it was making the hole. The upstairs area where the door was going to go used to have a chair, so Jez wanted to incorporate some form of seating there. This was also a great way to make sure no one knew it was an entrance to another room, feeding into the child in Jez. The seating was like a trapdoor that would make the entrance that much cooler for him to enter through. Jez built a bench that would be placed right over the entrance of the room. The timing of this was the hardest for Jez as it was during the holiday season, and all the professionals he wanted to use were on vacation with their families. Due to the fact that no one was around, he decided to take construction into his own hands. His and his father-in-law's hands, that is. Disaster or victory? After getting the courage and insight from other professionals as to how to do this, Jez cut a hole into the floor of his living room and the roof of his theater. The next step after building the whole creation was to build a ladder that could take someone up and down in a smooth way. Jez used wood that was over 100 years old to make the ladder for his room, making it that much more special. Jez built the ladder outside of the house, and when it was done, brought it in and secured it to the entrance of the room with incredibly sturdy screws to make sure it never moved. There were those who saw the creation and thought it was rather unsafe, and told Jez there were worries as to the security of the box atop the entrance. It could hurt someone if it wasn't secure enough. Jez replied to his fellow readers that he's aware of how much of an amateur he is, but that he used very good products for this and that he takes their concern and would do something about it. In order to find a solution for the lack of sturdy elements, Jez added an internal box to the structure to give it more stability. It was also a nice decorative element with a seated bench. Another concern someone had was that if someone sitting on the bench happened to be there, if the lid to the bench broke, they'd plummet down and into the theater with nothing to stop them. He recognized the concerns here, and while it was very unlikely to happen, he understood that people were looking out for his best interest, and that if anyone visiting his home, the last thing he needed was someone getting injured. Thinking about what people were saying as their concerns, Jez decided to add another layer to the trapdoor, a cutout floorboard that could remain closed until someone pushed it open and even so it would be slow. The people who were giving him the feedback were really having his best interest at heart. The photo here shows the inside of the bench with a trapdoor and bench inside. Safety first when it comes to multi-floor drops. Now that the projects had come to an end, Jez wanted to give some words of completion. He wrote that he put in so much work and was very proud of the way the projects turned out. He said that this room was his new favorite in the house, and many others feel the same. One reader mentioned that the room is probably the coolest in the summer with its features and cool, literally, vibes. Jez said the photo you're looking at was taken in the middle of summer when it was over 100 degrees outside, but in the home theater the room was beautiful and comfortable in the low 70s. The lid he placed on the top of the entry helps maintain the temperature in the room and remove any light pollution so that watching a movie is heavenly in that home theater he created for the family. In case you are wondering, Imgur is a photography platform where users can upload their images and explanations onto it for other people to follow. Between Reddit and Imgur, Jez had quite a following that was there with and for him throughout the entire duration of the projects that made his house his new favorite place in the world. Not that it wasn't before. Jez also got inspiration from others on these platforms, so it was a win-win. Not a Deck of Cards is the name of the album that Jez created on Imgur to show the progress of his project at home. Jez shared over 50 photos of the house during the entire project, and people were quickly asking for more. There's a rise in the home improvement industry. Between HGTV and the many shows they promote, it's a trend to beat all trends, and more people are using their own creativity to fix their homes. A similar story also happened in Ohio, however it was for a much different reason. As with life, your parents looked after you when you grew up, and as time moves on, it eventually comes back around for us to look after them as old age creeps in. For Sean Miller, his parents were everything to them, and along with his wife, they hatched a DIY plan that would end up making his parents very happy and relieved. At age 87, his parents George and Bonnie both needed a simpler life, and one they could do with ease. His mother Bonnie was almost completely wheelchair-bound, and George, his father, simply didn't have the strength to be able to get her around their house with ease. The time came where the old couple had to consider moving into a care facility, but there was no one place that had room for 2 people as a couple. After being together for almost all their lives, it would seem like it would do a lot more harm than good taking them away from one another. This is when Sean knew he had to do something for his parents. It was time to pay them back. Taking to his basement, he took everything upon himself and knew that he wanted to clear out the deserted space and turn it into a new home for his parents. It was no easy task. Everything needed to be built from the ground up, and he got started right away. After working hard for weeks, Sean finally completed the additional space that he'd created, and his parents were overjoyed. Being just below their own house meant that Sean and his wife could also easily care for his parents, and because of this, they'd never have to worry or feel bad about asking for help when they needed it. The space has everything they needed: a living room, kitchen, bath, and bedroom with all the mod cons needed to fit in with the height of Bonnie's wheelchair, meaning that George also got a little rest. The long-married couple were overjoyed. A problem with certain wheelchairs is that they don't also fit through door frames, but Sean thought that if he's gonna do this, then he has to go all the way and make it 100% accessible, and that's exactly what he did. After a bit of research, he found door frames that were wider than usual and could easily fit Bonnie and her wheelchair through without her having to get out of it. Sean sacrificed his man cave for his parents, and it was the best thing he could ever do.